And the Pentagon may have provided incorrect information on U.S. airstrikes in conflict zones worldwide to politicians and the general public. And it's possible the Department of Defense could have been doing this for years. That's according to an investigation by the Military Times magazine. It compared figures in different open source reports to different branches from the U.S. military. In one case, the difference amounted to 6,000 airstrikes, which went unreported. RT's Alexey Yaroshevsky reports.
Thousands of U.S. military airstrikes worldwide go unreported, according to the Military Times investigation. The magazine analyzed open-source data and came to such conclusion, particularly citing U.S. military action in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria. Afghanistan, in fact, serves as the most glaring example. Relying solely on open-source information, the Military Times learned that the number of reported airstrikes there in 2016 amounted to 615. However, the Air Force tally did not include 456 strikes performed by U.S. Army in Afghanistan using Apache helicopters. Having said that, Air Force's open-source data on its operations is very thorough. Going year by year, it details all operations to assess their impact and cost to U.S. taxpayers. It is also one of the prime sources for information and reports which end up in Congress, justifying, for instance, the need for additional military spending. The problem is that the Army, the Air Force, and the Navy are three different entities operating under the dome of Department of Defense. And when the Times reached out to DoD to have a complete list of all operations performed by all three of its military services, it did not get a response. And that's where many discrepancies documented by U.S. Military Times pop up. Another example is data on operations in Iraq and Syria. The DoD's public summary of strikes in those two countries says that from 2014, when the campaign against ISIS began, to January 31st, 2017, the U.S.-led coalition performed 17,681 strikes there, 14,000 of them by the United States. It claims to rely on Air Force open-source data, which actually says that in the same period there were 23,740 strikes performed. The difference is 6,000 there. And obviously, the one report military analysts and politicians alike relied on was that by the Defense Department. Officials insist they are not trying to hide anything, just that the system of tracking isn't effective itself. For instance, U.S. Army might not consider an Apache attack as an airstrike, even though it still is a release of weapons. And it's not the first time numbers related to U.S. military campaigns cause confusion and doubt. When Obama's administration released what it believed to be the death toll from drone strikes last year, many independent watchdogs said those were several times less than what they had managed to document over the years. The revelations from the Times, however, could be exposing a far more serious issue, that the numbers presented by the Pentagon to politicians, analysts, and media could have been wrong since 2001, when the U.S. began its campaign in Afghanistan. Needless to say, these figures could have been instrumental in decision-making when it comes to military operations and certainly military spending. Just for instance, and it's another data provided by the Military Times from the open source information, one Hellfire missile fired from an Apache helicopter costs almost $100,000. Now go back to what I started this report with, 456 undocumented such attacks in Afghanistan alone last year. And do the math. Alexey Yaroshevsky, RT, reporting from Washington, D.C.